I never imagined that a simple dinner could change my life, but that unfortunate evening it did. Night at Le Jardin, which is the crown jewel of New York's fine dining scene. When I walked in, the light from the crystal chandeliers washed over me and lit up the sea of well-dressed customers sitting at tables covered in crisp white linens. The air was thick with the smell of fine food and the soft murmur of intelligent conversation. "This is Clara here." And I suppose to feel great after eating at one of going to the city's most posh places in a dress that cost more than some people's rent every month. But as I took the Maître d' to our table, where my husband Leonard was waiting, a knot of fear grew in my gut. Leonard's mother, Agnes, and he were already sitting down. With his perfectly styled hair and expensive suit, he looked every bit the he played himself as a wealthy businessman, Agnes, dressed in pearls, with a look of perpetual disapproval on his face. They sat next to him like a guard watching over a valuable prize. As I took my seat, I could feel their eyes on me, looking closely, every move as if they were waiting for me to make a mistake. "You're late," Leonard said in a sharp voice, "become very used to over the years of our marriage. We've been waiting for 20 minutes. I'm sorry," I mumbled. Even though I knew I was on time, Agnes sniffed. "In a rude way, a woman should always be early, Clara." "It's a matter of respectfully." I nodded, because I didn't trust myself to talk. "Leonard, this was always how it went. They were united in their criticism of me, and it was hard for me to keep my head above water in the sea of their words." As the waiter neared, he or she brought a welcome sign of short-term relief. "Good evening." He said it in a French accent that made the already fancy environment even more so. "May I offer you?" Leonard told him to go away. "Don't bother us. We'll have a bottle of the Shadow Mogo 1787. My eyes got really big. I knew that wine price tag of more than $500,000 per bottle, Leonard mumbled. "Are you sure that's it?" he asked as he cut me off with a look that could freeze a person. "Fire. I know what I'm doing, Clara. Don't make me look bad." To his credit, the waiter didn't bat an eye. "Great pick, sir. And Leonard ordered food for you." A special off-menu dish with rare white truffles from Alba Agnes was served without checking the menu. And something just as fancy when it was my turn. I quietly asked for, I could only find one easy thing, a Caesar salad. Agnes laughed. "What a salad." "Clara, you shouldn't be too worried about your weight, so you should enjoy this kind of food when you can." Her eyes were on me the whole night, making me feel open and not good enough. As the talk moved forward in a cloud of tension, Leonard and Agnes took over. As they talked about their recent trip to Monaco and their upcoming trip to the Maldives, I pushed my as I sipped water and topped my plate with salad. I felt more like a spectator than a player in my own life. The next course came out, a dish that looked more like art than food. Leonard looked at me. "So, Clara," he spoke in a tone that seemed casual, "have you thought more about quitting that little job of yours? You know it's not fun, that you really need to work." I tensed up. My little job was a post I worked hard to get the job of financial analyst and I like it. "Leonard," Agnes added, "a wife's place is in the home, dear you. Shouldn't be trying to be a working woman. She should be making Leonard happy." I felt a familiar surge of, "It's not fun playing Agnes. I'm good at what I do in real life." Leonard's face turned dark. "We'll talk about this later," he said in a stern voice. "Fight." The rest of the meal was a blur of fake smiles and awkward small talk. I was counting the minutes. We couldn't leave until the waiter came over with the bill. Leonard took a quick look at it and then smiled in a way that didn't make sense. He looked into my eyes and gave it to me. "Be a dear and take care of this, won't you? You know it's your job to back up your husband in everything." When I saw the bill, I felt my blood drain from it was more than $550,000 more than most people make in a 10 years ago. I knew we had money, but this was way too much. It was also completely reckless. "Leonard," I said in a voice just above a whisper, "this is too much. We can't do it." "Rising can't afford it, don't be," he said, cutting him off. "Clara, Stop being silly and just pay the bill." I took a deep breath and felt something. Shift inside me, years of anger, hatred, and frustration came to the surface. My voice was surprisingly strong when I said no to the surface. It was very quiet after that. Leonard's face was angry, and before I could react, he grabbed his PL and 8 chits and pushed the chair back so hard that it fell over in one smooth move. Contents right at my face. I was shocked as truffle-flavoured sauce dripped on me. Tears were running down my cheeks, and expensive mushroom pieces were stuck in my hair. The diner was silent, and everyone was looking at me. Leonard yelled, "I'm your husband!" at our table, as if on cue. The loud laughter of Agnes broke the quiet. "I told you, Leonard," she cackled. "You should have divorced this witch, but you never did. I told you loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. People listened to me." I was embarrassed and shocked as other people in the restaurant started to whisper and point. Some people looked away in shame, while others stared freely with their forks halfway to their mouths. I felt smaller at that moment. I felt better than I ever had. But as I wiped, something strange happened. The source from my eyes, I saw myself in a nearby mirror instead of the woman who was broken and crying. I saw someone else instead. Someone with fire in their eyes and steel in their neck. I slowly stood up. Leonard and Agnes were still calling each other names, but their moves were calm and planned. The words they used seemed to fade into the background. I was done being their target. I was done being the quiet one. Obedient wife. I was done letting them tell me what I was worth. I straightened my back, and when I raised my chin, I saw worry written on his face as I saw the Maître D coming up behind me. In a low voice, "Madam, is everything okay?" I looked at him and then at Leonard. Agnes, who was now looking at me with a mix of anger and confusion, I started to think of a plan that would change everything. But I told her, "Stay calm, everything is not okay." Leonard and Agnes didn't know it yet, but their rule of terror was about to end as I stood there. I made a choice. Vision. It was while still covered in the remains of a $500,000 meal. It was time for me to take back control of my life, and it would begin right here in this restaurant during this storm. Had been building for years was about to break, and as I stood there with tears in my face, I knew that things would never be the same again. Still upset about Leonard's $500,000 temper tantrum, I felt a strange calm come over me. What I thought was shock had turned into something else. Clarity I hadn't felt in years. The whispers of the other people at the table faded into the background as I looked into the eyes of the metro driver, a man I knew very well, but had claimed not to. I quietly called him by his first name for the first time and said, "Too long, Jean. In public, could you please bring me a towel?" Jean nodded, and there was a moment of understanding between us as he spoke. Before I ran away, I quickly turned around to face Leonard and Agnes, who were looking at me with a scared and angry look on their faces. They clearly thought I would cry and beg them to forgive me or hide away in shame, but I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. "Rules? What are you doing?" Leonard hissed, his face red with anger. "Stop making a scene and sit down." I almost laughed at how funny it was that I was making a scene that's rich coming from the man who just threw food at his wife. Agnes gasped out loud, "How dare you!" I took a big breath when I heard you talk to your husband that way. After all he did for you, I held my breath for what was going to happen and asked myself, what has he done for me? Agnes put me down and controlled me. Leonard's eyes got really big when he heard that last part. "Clara, don't be silly about your money. Everything we have is because I worked hard." Work. Jean came back with a warm, wet towel, and I started to wash my face. I saw other staff members quietly gathering nearby to watch the scene play out with knowing looks. "It was time to Leonard Agnes," I told you in a steady, clear voice. I need to tell you something about this place." Leonard laughed. "You've been meeting the Maître D behind my back. Is that why you insisted on coming to this expensive dump? I couldn't help it, but laugh at how stupid he is. No, Leonard, I'm not having an affair, I told him. The diner is owned by my family, and there was dead silence after that. Leonard's mouth opened wide, and Agnes's face went through different shades of red and purple. What are you talking about? Finally stuttered something about Leonard. I took a seat and felt more in charge than I had in a long time. Years ago, Le Jardin was owned by my grandparents and then passed down to me. My parents took a small bar and turned it into the fancy restaurant it is now. That's where I grew up, learning everything about this business, from how to do the books to washing dishes. Agnes found her voice, sounding more like a squeak, but you never said anything, so I agreed. When I met Leonard, I was working here as a waitress to learn how the front desk worked. He thought I was but I lied to him and told him I thought it would be sweet to let him get to know me, for I stopped and thought about those early days with my family, when I wasn't who I was for their success. A pang of nostalgia, but as time went on and I saw how Leonard treated the staff the same way he treated me, I understood that telling the truth would make things worse, because he would either try to take over my family's business or get angry. He was mad at me for having something he couldn't control. Leonard's face had turned a scary white colour. He was lying to me the whole time. I told him he was wrong, but I left out some details. The same way you didn't say that you were seriously in debt when you got married, or that you've been using my trust fund to fund your business projects for years to come. Agnes stood up quickly, her chair making a loud noise. Against the floor. That's crazy, Leonard. We're going, I won't stand here. And listened to these lies, but Leonard stayed where he was, looking around the restaurant as if it were the first time. He said it for the first time after all those business parties and networking events. They all said yes. Leonard, all those important people you've been trying to impress have known who I am the whole time. They were just too nice to say anything. He felt like he took a direct hit to the head when he realized this. His carefully built world of power and control was falling apart around him, and for the first time in the years I'd known him, I felt sorry for him. Leonard looked small. Jean came back to our table, this time with 2 security guards. With guards on toes, he asked Mrs. Durand, "Is everything okay here?" Raised my still-stained dress and said, "No, Jean, it's not Mr. Durand and his mother and daughter have been acting in a way that is bothering our other guests. I think it's time for them to leave, Leonard." Raised his voice and said, "You can't do this to me. I'm your husband." Attacked me in public, I told him gently. "Jean, please walk Mr. Durand, and they are no longer welcome at Le Jardin because Mrs. Beaumont told them so." A group of guards moved up behind Leonard and Agnes. I saw fear in their eyes. They were used to being in charge. They were in charge and made the decisions. But now I'm in this place that had been my safe haven before I met them. "Power wasn't worth it," Agnes yelled as she was led out the door. "You're nothing without us," Clara said. Nothing as I watched them leave. With each step they took away from me, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. People had gone back to their meals, but I could still feel their curious looks and hear what they were saying. Talks. When Leonard and Agnes were out of sight, I told Jean, I'm sorry for the noise," I said softly. He shook his head and smiled. "Mrs. Durand, you don't need to say sorry. It's great to see you again. Look around the restaurant at the sparkling lights, perfectly set tables and busy kitchen that can be seen through a bay. This place had been my home and memory for a long time before Leonard came. It's good to be back in my life. This is the start of a new chapter." I answered, I meant it with all my heart, and made my way to the private room. I could feel the staff's eyes on me in the office upstairs. There was respect and maybe a little awe in those looks. For years I had been the weak, obedient wife in front of them. They were finally getting to see the real me. The office looked just like I remembered it, with warm wood walls and soft carpet. There were leather chairs and a wall of windows that looked out over the sparkling New York City. I sank into the chair behind the smooth surface of the desk, made me wonder how many times I had sat here. with my dad learning how the business worked. How many late nights had I spent hours going over budgets and food plans as the fight's adrenaline started to wear off. It hit me what I had just done. I had stood up to Leonard and Agnes. I had taken back my identity. And by doing so, I had changed the course of my life forever. I picked up the phone from the desk, my fingers moving automatically as I called a number I knew. And after 2 rings, a warm, motherly voice answered. I said, my voice a little shaky, "I need to talk to you in an hour." Told my mother everything. The years of mental abuse, the theft of money, and finally the events of that night. She listened without talking over me and made soft sounds to help me when my voice got weak. When I was done, she told me, "Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. We've been worried. For so long. But we didn't want to bother you," I told her, wiping away a stray hair. "I'm sorry I shut you out. I thought I could handle it by myself." My mother told me, "We're here for you no matter what," as I hung up. As I picked up the phone, I felt like I had a new sense of purpose. I had been lowering my light for years so Leonard could shine, but now it was my turn. Time for me to get back to being brilliant. I got out a legal pad and started making plans. Things to do, people to call, and changes to make before the last dinner had already left the restaurant, and the staff was done cleaning up. I planned to call my lawyer tomorrow. As soon as I could, I would meet with the restaurant's boss and management team and become more involved in. Leonard kept telling me to stay away from old friends and co-workers, but now that I was running the business, I would see them again. Tonight I was going to enjoy this moment of freedom. I went to the windows and looked out at the city I loved. New York had always been a place where second chances were made new. Now it was my turn, and as I stood there, I saw that the woman in the glass was someone I had almost forgotten about. Leonard had thrown a $500,000 curveball at her, and she had been there the whole time, ready to take the chance. She was strong and not scared. I thought the food in my face would break me, but it set me free and made me grow. I took a deep breath to settle myself and realized that a smile was worth a lot. I could see the New York skyline through the cool window glass. It looked like 1,000 bright stars in the dark. Now was the time to face the music of the trouble I had just made in my own kitchen. When I went back downstairs, I could hear the low hum of conversation from the people who were still there. Word had definitely gotten around. They were interested in what had happened, and I could feel them following me through the dining room. Some were receptive and interested, but none of them held the judgment I was afraid Jean would meet. I met him at the bottom of the stairs. His usually calm face was creased with worry. "Mrs. Durand," he said in a soft voice. "Durand and Mrs. Beaumont are still outside, making a lot of noise." I sigh. Putting my finger on the bridge of my nose, I knew they were Leonard and Agnes. Been the type to go to sleep quietly at night. What kind of noise did Jean make? They hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and then threatened to call the cops, saying they were taken from the property without permission, which is something Mr. Durand is very public about. I could picture Leonard out there with a red face and yelling, which would make Agnes mad. She cried out loud about how unfair everything was. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. I squared my shoulders and said, "Okay, I'll take care of this." Leonard's words could be heard through the heavy oak doors at the main entrance. "Do you know who I am?" Yelling, "I'll have this place shut down. I'll sue all of you." I pushed Leonard, and Agnes stepped out into the cool night air when you opened the door for them. Their faces were a mix of surprise and worry. Of rage and shock, Agnes spat at me and pointed a bad finger at me. "How dare you? Shame us in this way." I met her steady gaze. "I think you did a pretty good job of that." "Well, on your own," Agnes Leonard said, and his face turned red with anger. "Isn't over, Clara. You can't just throw me away like old trash. I'm yours." "Husband, the husband who had just had sex with me in front of a restaurant full of people who saw," I told him quietly. "You'll see that I can do exactly what I did," he said as he jumped forward and grabbed my arm. "I looked at you, little Dash. Before he could finish his words, two big hands grabbed him and pulled him back. I looked up and saw Marco, David, our head of security, and his deputy standing next to Leonard. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Durand Marco?" he asked in a deep voice. I shook my head and rubbed the arm where Leonard had grabbed me. "No problem, Marco," Mr. Durand said. Leonard fought Marco's grip and said, "Get your hands off of me." "Big gorilla, do you know who I am?" David is always the more polite one. "Two stepped in, sir. We have to ask you to leave the building if you don't mind. As long as you keep making a fuss, Agnes, we will have to call the cops." Let out a dramatic gasp. And the cops, but we're the ones who got hurt here. This woman poked fun at me, stole my son's money, and is now trying to hurt his image. I couldn't help it, but laugh at how silly it all is. Agnes stole all of his money. Leonard has bought things from my family's business that he didn't even know about 5 years ago. I could see Leonard's face getting paler when I told him what I said until tonight, as he understood how dangerous his situation was. "Clara," he said, his voice becoming soft and, "Weeding sweetheart, don't rush into anything. Let's talk about this." "Can't we be like adults?" I asked myself. How many times had he was so good at this trick that I let him talk me out of it many times? His cruelty and trickery. "No, Leonard, I told you straight out. We're done talking." Done for now. I asked Marco and David to make sure that Mr. Durand and Mrs. Beaumont had to leave the diner and was not allowed back in under any circumstances. Marco gave them a nod. He had a small smile on the corner of his lips as he thought about Mrs. Durand, Leonard, and Agnes were being led away when I felt a hand on my shoulder. When I turned around, Jean was standing next to me. He had a quiet look of pride on his face and said, "You did well, Clara." He used my first name. "This is the first time in years that I've felt tears in my eyes when I heard your name." Tear in my eye. "Thank you, Jean, for everything." We stood there watching in silence as David and Marco led Leonard and Agnes to the curb. Even though Leonard was still arguing, he didn't sound as sure of himself. Agnes, on the other hand, had quickly left. She was not being quiet, and her eyes were darting around as if she were looking for a way out. When they got to the street, a cab was waiting for them. Marco pulled up and opened the door. His face showed that this wasn't a suggestion with one last. With an angry look in my direction, Leonard got into the cab first, then Agnes, who was more calm. As the taxi pulled away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew it wasn't over. There will be more legal fights and emotional fallout, but for the first time I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. I turned back to the restaurant and looked at the beautiful front. Spilling out of the windows, this place had been my safe haven and my legacy, but now it would be a new start for me, Jean. I told her I thought it was time to close up for the night. Tomorrow We talked about some changes, and he nodded with a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Durand will," I told the staff. I smiled and felt a rush of love for this man, who has been more like a father to me lately than my own father. "Please and Jean tell. Tell them that things will get better from now on," as I went back inside to start the closing process. I took a moment to myself on the steps of Le Jardin. The air was cool at night. Cool against my skin and giving me a faint smell of city car exhaust street. I looked at the food and felt the energy of New York after dark. I also thought about the scene that had just happened, about the years of holding back anger and bitterness had finally come to a head. Part of me felt bad for making such a spectacle. In the business my family owned, but a bigger part that was getting stronger by the minute, I felt thrilled, because I had been the right person for so long so that my wife would always be there for me. I turned down my own light. Make Leonard shine brighter. But as I stood on the edge of my own domain, I understood how much I had given up in order to keep the peace. I told myself I would never do that again. I was going to never again let someone else tell me what I was worth, what I should do, or who I was. As I turned to go back inside, caught sight of my image in the shiny brass door handle. The woman I saw there was someone I knew. I smiled when I saw her. She was strong, sure of herself, and had a fire in her eyes that I thought had been put out a long time ago. I felt a rush of pride as I looked at myself in the mirror. This was who I was meant to be. I had hidden the woman I was now under years of self-doubt and giving in to others, was finally free inside, and the last few guests were packing up and looking at me with interest. As they left, the staff quickly cleared the tables and shut down the kitchen, but there was a sense of, as I walked through the dining room, I stopped to enjoy the excitement of the moment. I talked to every member of the staff and thanked them for being discreet and professional that night. Drama, I told them their jobs were safe, better than safe, and that Oui Le Jardin was about to start a new era, and I wanted them all to be a part of it. As the last guest left, the eye got the whole staff together in the main dining room, where the doors were locked, and we stood there among the people who I felt like I was coming home, because you all kept my family's legacy alive, even though I had pulled away from it. Thank you all for your hard work. In spite of the feelings that were going through me, I kept my voice steady at work tonight. I know that things didn't go exactly as planned this evening, and I appreciate how flexible and professional you were. Paused to look around at the familiar faces, some of which I had known since I was a kid. Others were younger members of the Le Jardin family, but they had all seen me slowly pull away from the business, and everyone there had continued to treat me with respect, even though Leonard was often boring. As you may have guessed, things are going to change here, I told them. I want you all to know that it has never been just a diner to me, it's like a family. These changes will make things better. It was clear that everyone agreed. I've been away from that family for far too long. With tired looks on her face, Jean, who was standing at the back of the group, gave me a positive nod and said, "Starting tomorrow, I'll be much more involved in the day-to-day. I know I need to catch up on a lot of work for Le Jardin, and I'll be counting on all of you to help me do it. I promise that Le Jardin will not only stay the best restaurant in New York, but it will also become a model for how a company should treat its workers and the community." As soon as I was done speaking, an impromptu round of when the applause started, I felt my cheeks turn red with a mix of shame and joy. This was my team, my people. We were going to write the next part of the Le Jardin story together as the staff started to go their separate ways. Give me a hug or a word of support. I felt like my life had a meaning that it hadn't had in too long. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for a long time, but for the first time in years, I was excited about the task. Le Jardin had always been my safe place, and now it would be. That's where I would fight to get back my life, my identity and my future, and I was ready for the fight. After all the trouble at Le Jardin, I woke up the next morning in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. Thought about going back to the apartment I shared with Leonard. My mum had told me to stay with them, but this time I didn't. Argue as I lay there staring at the ceiling, which I had done a million times as a youth. Memories started to come back to me, not just of my childhood, but also of the years I spent with Leonard, show how he manipulated and hurt me emotionally. Over time, I had become used to it. I remembered how charming Leonard had been on our first date, and how he had swept me off my feet. I was young and eager, just out of college, and he swept me off my feet with his confidence and drive. Leonard had seemed like the right partner, someone who would help me prove myself outside of my family's business. Help me reach my goals and be the best version of myself. I can't believe how fast that dream had turned bad. It all began with little things like, "If you like my clothes or think I should change my hair or makeup, I just want you to look at." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he said, "Your best, darling." Then came the Leonard had slowly but surely put down my friends, my hobbies and my job, took away my confidence and turned me into the quiet, obedient wife he wanted. Then there was Agnes from the Leonard's mother, made it clear to me right away that she didn't think I was good enough for her son. Pick fault with my manners at the table or my schoolwork, always with a sweet smile and, "I'm just trying to help you." Fit in, dear. Between the two of them, they had slowly taken away my trust until I barely recognized them. It was my choice to step down from the family business and let Leonard take credit for my ideas and links. I cut myself off from family and friends, putting myself in a world where Leonard and Agnes's views were the most important. I was in my rye Clara when I heard a knock on the door. It was my mum. A soft voice asked, "Are you awake, sweetheart?" "Come in, Mum," I answered while sitting up. She walked in with a tray full of breakfast foods like scrambled eggs, toast and fruit. She ran her hand through my knotted hair as she did so. A hot cup of coffee, the sight and smell of it made me think of many mornings before school when my mum always, "I thought you might be hungry," she said, putting the tray down next to me. "A good breakfast is the key to a good day." As she sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes were filled with a mix of worry and joy. "How are you?" I honestly took a sip of coffee and felt the warmth spread through me. I'm not sure if I've been asleep for years and I'm only now waking up. Mum nodded and reached out to squeeze my, "I know, baby. Your dad and I have been so worried about you. We saw what was going on but didn't know how to help without pushing you away." I felt guilty all the time. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner about how my silence must have made your parents feel." "Mum, I never meant to keep you out. I just thought I could handle it. If I just worked harder, things would get better, right, Clara's mum?" I hugged him back and told him, "None of this is your fault, Leonard. That one of them is his mother, and they're the ones. It's my fault that I let myself feel like a child again for so long. For a long time, I had been trying to be strong to keep up appearances. It felt good to let go. I went to be open with someone I knew really cared about me as I pulled back and wiped away tears. I didn't know I had shed a new determination, passed over me. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, feeling both scared and free as the words left my mouth. My mum nodded and played a small smile on her lips. "I think that's 4, I said. "Have a great day, honey, and know that your dad and I are behind you all the way. We're here if you need legal help, money, or just someone to talk to." I felt so thankful. "Thanks, Mum. I don't know what I'd do without you. Without you guys, I'd finish breakfast and take a long, hot shower." I took out some old clothes from my closet, a simple shirt and pants, because I felt ready for the day. That fit me better than anything I'd worn in years. I went downstairs and found my dad working on some papers in his office. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled warmly. "There's my girl," he said as he stood up to hug me. I mumbled, "Hi, Dad," into his chest as we hugged. I felt safe and loved in a way I couldn't explain. Dad held me at arm's length as we broke apart. He hadn't done that in far too long. With tears in my eyes, "You know, I always hoped you'd come back to us. It hadn't gone well with all of this." I nodded, understanding the years of silence. He said, "I know, Dad. I'm sorry I let things get so out of hand." Firmly shook his head. "Clara, you don't need to say sorry. What matters is that he told her, you're back in charge of your life now that you're here." The tone changed to one I knew from many business meetings. "Let's talk strategy for the next few hours, Dad." He told me about a great divorce lawyer who had helped other people, and we talked about the steps I needed to take. Help famous people get through difficult divorces. We talked about the restaurant and my plans to take I felt more and more excited as I took an active part in managing it. "Mum, it was lunchtime, and I was making my own choices for the first time in years. I started my own path, demanded that we all take a break. We met in the kitchen to make sandwiches and laugh about old family stories. Not having to think about Leonard's disapproval or Agnes's mean comments made me smile and laugh after lunch. When I knew it was time to make the call I had been fearing and looking forward to, I went to the guest room to be alone. When I called the lawyer my dad had suggested, Catherine Reeves's office, my heart was racing. "How may I assist you?" A clear voice answered. "Hello, my name is Clara Durand, and I'd like to make an appointment with Monsieur Reeves to talk about a divorce proceeding." The words came out of my mouth in a strange way, but they were also deeply true. This was the first step. I set up the meeting to help me take back my life and become the woman I was always meant to be. The next day, I felt a lot of different emotions. Fear, for sure. I knew. But Leonard wouldn't let me go without a fight. I spent the night full of hope, energy, and a growing sense of my own strength. Went through old picture albums with my mum for the rest of the afternoon, remembering better times and dreaming about as night fell. We all met in the living room, where Dad he raised a bottle of champagne and poured each of us a glass to toast the start of a new life. He raised his glass and I did the same to honour my family by clinking my glass against theirs. I felt calm as I sipped the fizzy drink. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could handle it. I wasn't going through it by myself. My real family was with me every step of the way. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts kept going to Le Jardin. I made a note in my mind to tell the staff, Jean and Marco and everyone else who had seen my change call Jean in the morning, to start making plans for the future of the business and our own future. It's been years since I've done this. I smiled as I went to sleep, excited to see what the new day would bring for Clara, who had let herself be. The woman who had shrunk to fit the shape that Leonard and Agnes had made was no longer there. In her place was a woman who was ready to stand tall, to shine brightly and face any difficulties that come your way, just like I did. As I fell asleep, I promised myself that no matter what happened with the divorce, or how hard Leonard and could Agnes try to fight me, I would never let anyone make me feel small again. My name was Clara Durand, and I was the daughter of I was ready to write the next part of my story on my own terms, as a survivor and businesswoman. A few days after talking with divorce lawyer Samantha Reeves, I was back at Le Jardin, busy with day-to-day things, running of the business. It was nice to be back to using my hands and mind for something useful. The staff was happy to see me, and I was slowly but surely getting back on my feet in the business world. Jean knocked on the door while I was in the middle of a meeting with our head cook to talk about possible changes to the menu. "Thank you for letting me talk to you, Mrs. Durand. I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Durand is here and he really wants to talk to you." I felt my stomach drop, but I took a deep breath and hid myself because I knew this argument was going to happen. "Thank you, Jean. Could you please show him up?" As Jean went to get Leonard, I told Chef Michel I'm sorry, but we have to keep talking about this later. Could you give us some space? Michel agreed. His kind eyes were full of Clara, of course. Take as much time as you need. As he walked away, I stood up. I took another deep breath and smoothed out my shirt. I knew I could do this. I felt stronger and more sure of myself. Leonard could no longer scare me because the door flew open and he stormed in, his face red with anger, holding a stack of papers that I knew were the divorce papers my lawyer had sent over. What the hell is going on? "This Clara," he growled as he waved the papers in my face. "Is this some kind of joke?" Met his steady gaze and told him, "Leonard, it's not a joke. I'm filing for divorce." I laughed, but the sound of the divorce was harsh and angry. "You can't divorce me," I said. "There was nothing without me, Clara." I felt a flash of my old fear, but I pushed it away. "Leonard, you're wrong about that. I was someone else before I met you." "I'll still be someone even after you're gone," he said as he slammed the papers on my desk and leaned in close. He smelled like alcohol. "You think you can throw away everything we've worked for together?" I raised an eyebrow at everything you did for me, after everything I did for you. "You mean putting me down all the time, cutting me off from my family and friends and spending my money like it wasn't worth it?" Water on Leonard's face made him look angry. "Your money doesn't make me laugh all the time. Every penny we have is because of my hard work and relationships. That made me laugh, Leonard. You mean the people I put you in touch with through my family's business, which you didn't even know about? Him until a few days ago, and he stumbled for a moment when he was caught off guard. By being honest with you, but he quickly gathered you ungrateful little witch after I've put up with your insecurities and weak attempts at a job, and now this is how you repay me." I felt angry when he said those things, but I kept my cool and told Leonard to put up with it. You made me feel insecure and sabotaged every attempt I made at independence. But not anymore." He laughed. "What are you going to do if you have to run this little business by yourself? In a month you'll be asking me to come back." I smiled and felt powerful in a way I hadn't in years. "Leonard, this little diner has been in my family for generations and was successful long before you came along. And it will keep working even after you're gone." Leonard's face turned pale as he realized the truth. It finally hit Clara. "You can't do this to me. Think about what other people might think. We'll say, think about my reputation." I shook my head and said, "Thank you." "Leonard, for once I'm not thinking about what you want but what I want. What I need." He charged forward and grabbed my arm. "Listen to me, you." Before little Dash could finish, the door slammed open and Marco, our head of security, ran in. "Gan, Mrs. Durand." Marco asked, "Is everything okay?" He looked at Leonard's face. Leonard's hand was on my arm and I gently but strongly took it off. "Everything's fine." Mark Durand was just leaving, and Leonard looked from me to Mark Durand and back again. He lost his fight all at once. "This isn't over, Clara," he said in a low voice. "Yes, it is," I said definitely as Marco led Leonard out of the room. I sat down in my chair, tired but strangely excited. Jan hovered by he asked me softly, "Are you okay, Clara?" With worry written all over his face, I said, "Yes." Putting on a small smile, I say, "I'm fine, Gan. I'm better than fine. I feel free." With a smile on his face and comfort in his eyes, Jean said, "I'm glad to hear that. You know we're all behind you, Clara. The whole Star half knows how he treated you over the years, and we're glad to see the real you again. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Jean. That means more to me than you know." I was at my desk and looked out at the city of New York. The argument with Leonard had been bad, but it had. I had to stand my ground for the first time and refuse to be scared. I thought about the path Jay had taken me to get to this point. The years of slowly losing, I kept accusing Agnes of putting out my own light so that Leonard could shine stronger, which hurt my feelings. Low self-esteem and being cut off from my family and friends until Leonard and Agnes was the only one I could hear. I also thought about how strong I had become over the last few days, my folks' help, the loyalty of the staff at Le Jardin. With the help of Samantha Reeves, I wasn't fighting this battle by myself. I had friends who believed in me, had faith in me and wanted me to succeed. I called Samantha's number and her helper put me through. I did not waste time making small talk. Leonard was just here and I told him he's seen the divorce papers. I thought Samantha would nod through the phone and I could almost hear it. "How did it happen? I told you everything about the fight." When I was done, Tails asked what happened. Sam was quiet for a moment and Clara finally told her, "I want you to know how. I am so proud of you. It's never easy to stand up to an abuser, but you did it with grace and the power her words gave you. It made me cry. Thank you, Samantha. I couldn't have done it without both of your help." "You're stronger than you think," Clara said. Now that I see Leonard's response, I guess I should. I think we should be ready for him to fight the divorce. Are you ready for that? I took a deep breath and thought about it. Her words. Are you ready for a long legal fight for Leonard to possibly smear my name all over the place to try to get everything I had? I finally said no matter what it takes, I'm not going back to that life, good Samantha. I could hear the smile in her voice as she said, "Let's get to work on over the next few hours." Samantha and I went over our plan and talked about money, records, witness accounts as proof of Leonard's emotional abuse. It was hard to remember some of the things that happened. That was the worst time of my marriage, but it was also therapeutic. Each piece of proof was another nail in the coffin of my old life, one more step toward freedom. By the time we were done, it was late at night. That place down below was busy, and I could hear people talking and glasses clinking on the floor above me. Stretched out the kinks in my back and went downstairs. The dining room was full of beautifully dressed people. As I walked by the well-dressed customers, the air was filled with the smell of exquisite food. Through it, I caught bits of talk and saw happy faces. That's what La Jardin was. Not only great food, but also an experience and a moment of happiness in the middle of I went to the kitchen, where Chef Michel and his team were working like a well-oiled machine. Making dish after dish of perfection. Michel looked up when I asked him if everything was okay. "Clara," he asked, plating a tiny sole as he spoke. I smiled and felt I had a sense of belonging that I hadn't had in years. "Everything is fine, Michel. In fact, I was wondering if you had time to pick up where we left off in our talk earlier. I have some ideas I'd like to share with you." Michel's face lit up when she saw you, Clara. "Please let me finish this job, and it's all yours." While I waited for Michel, I leaned against the wall and took in the kitchen's controlled chaos. I saw that this was my world, not the fancy parties and fake smiles of Leonard's social circle. I felt the heat, pressure, and imagination of a top restaurant kitchen for the first time in a long time. I still remember how excited I was about the future, even though I knew it would be hard. I knew that getting divorced would be a mess, and that remaking my life would take time and work, but I was still in the heart of it. I knew I was ready for the task when I saw Le Jardin. I was Clara Durand's historian. It was time for me to rise from the ashes of my old life as a businessman. The months went by quickly as lawsuits, business decisions, and feeling stronger and more motivated than ever before psychological growth. The divorce proceedings were just as messy as Samantha had said they would be, with Leonard fighting tooth and nail for every penny, but each day I felt better and more able to stand my ground. When I got the call from Samantha, it was a cool autumn morning. I was in the middle of a Le Jardin staff meeting where we were talking about our holiday plans when my phone rang, egged on my pocket. "Excuse me," I told the team as I stepped out of the room, asked Samantha, "What's the news?" Her voice was warm and happy. "It's over." I leaned my legs against the wall and said, "Clara, the judge has signed off on the divorce settlement. You're free now." I felt weak all of a sudden. "Really, it's over." Samantha confirmed, "And Clara, we won. You still own 100% of Le Jardin and all of your family's other businesses." Leonard walks away with a deal that's nice, but not even close to what he was asking for. It made me cry. "Thank you, Samantha. Thanks for all the hard work you put in, Clara. I just helped you get through it. The legal maze. Now go have a party. You deserve it." When I hung up the phone, I had a moment to calm down. The past few months had been a wild ride of fear, anger, determination, and now finally felt better. I was free. Really free. I walked back into the meeting room where my team was quietly waiting. Jean, who is always aware, saw the change in my mood right away. "Is everything okay, Clara?" he asked. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had been there for me through this. His voice was full of worry. Tough time, Chef Michel, who worked hard with me to change our food, and Marco, who made sure I was safe. When Leonard's behaviour got out of hand, the servers, cooking staff and cleaners all came together to help. Giving me help in big and small ways, everything is great. I said I have a big smile on my face because the breakup is over. Le Jardin is now without a doubt ours. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and before I knew it, I had hugs, handshakes, and words of congratulations thrown at her. Room was tangible proof of how much this place and these people meant to me. Chef Michel cleared his throat and said, "I think this calls for an event, or maybe a special meal tonight, on the house." Of course I laughed and felt better than I had in years. I think that's a great idea. "Michel, let's lock the doors to the restaurant tonight and throw a party for the staff and their families. Don't just celebrate my breakup. Celebrate all of us and the great team we've built." People were excited about the idea, and soon everyone was making plans for the team split up to start getting ready. "Jean stayed behind, Clara," he said. "Be quiet, but know that we are all proud of how you've handled everything and made the changes here." At Le Jardin, it was moving to watch. I got a lump in my throat. He smiled and said, "Thank you, Jean." I couldn't have done any of it without all of you. Gently putting his hand on my shoulder. You are truly their daughter, and they would be so proud to see you now as Jean went to help plan the party, and I went to my office to take a moment to think about everything. I walked to the window and looked out to let the truth of my new situation sink in. I could see the city of New York spread out in front of me like a painting. It was possible. I was truly excited about the future for the first time in longer than I could remember. I got a text message from my mum telling me about the good news. I'm so proud of you, Dad. I'll be there tonight to celebrate with you. I smiled as I typed a quick note. Answer. My parents and I have been getting along better than ever again over the past few months. Had been my rock during the divorce process, giving me support, advice, and a place to cry on when things got tough. The moment I put down my phone, I saw a framed picture on my desk. A picture from many years ago of me on the day I joined the family business for real. Parents outside of Le Jardin, all of us smiling with pride and joy. I ran my finger along the frame and picked it up. More than the picture, that young woman in the picture had so many hopes and goals for the future. Years ago, when I was with Leonard, I lost sight of her. Now I saw that I had found her, and again the rest of the day went by quickly. By evening, Le Jardin had been changed. The formal dining room had been replaced by a more casual fun space where tables were pushed together to make long, famous-style seats. There was champagne in the bar, and food was being made in the kitchen. It smelled great as our workers and their families started to show up. I felt like I was part of a community. I missed having kids in my life for way too long. They played hide and seek between the tables. Soft jazz played over the speakers and couples danced to it. Laughter and talk filled the room, arrived right away and embraced me warmly. We are so proud of you. Clara, my dad said in a teary voice, you've shown such strength and thanks, Grace. My mum said as she squeezed my hand. Look at what you've done with Le Jardin. It's better than ever. As we walked through the crowd, I was amazed at how many people stopped to give their, not only compliments on the divorce, but also on the changes I made at the restaurant where we grew our business. Community Outreach started a mentorship program for poor young people who want to become cooks and updated our offering to include more sustainable, locally sourced options. In the middle of the night, John clinked his glass, calling out. He asked, if I could have everyone's attention for a moment, and his voice echoed through the room. All eyes were on me as I raised a glass to our brave leader, Clara Durand. My cheeks turned red as Clara Jean went on. You have shown us all Le Jardin has not written about what it means to be strong enough to face problems head on and come out better as a result. Not only made it through, but flourished. You've built more than a restaurant, you've built a family for Clara. As people in the room raised their glasses, I looked around at the smiling faces I saw. Med was filled with thanks. This was what I had been missing during those years with Leonard. Real ties, a sense of purpose, and the joy of making something important. The party went late into the night, and as it was ending, I back at my office window, taking in the view of the city lights. The door softly opened behind me and He turned around and saw Chef Michel come up to stand next to him. I smiled and nodded. It was great. Thanks, Michel, for everything. Didn't thank me. We should have thanked you, Clara. You've lived. New life into this place and into all of us. We stood there in quiet companionship for a moment to look down at the city below. Michel finally asked, "What's next for Claire Durand?" I laughed for the first time in a long time. Michelle laughed when she heard that we had that new farm-to-table project to launch the charity dinner next month. Always busy. But I meant for you. You're free now. And the world is your shell, as they say. I thought about his question. What do I want now that I was free to want what I want? I said. I want to travel. The thought took a while to sink in. As I said, shape. I couldn't be away from Le Jardin for too long because I could never be sick. But I want to learn more about foods and cultures I haven't been to before. I want to bring those memories back to make Le Jardin not only New York's best restaurant, but also a place that celebrates the variety of food from around the world. Michelle agreed and nodded. I think that sounds great, Clara, and know that we'll all. When you come back, I'll be ready to help you make your visions come true, just like Michelle said she would. When I looked back out the window, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The trip up to this point had been hard. It was hard and painful, but I wouldn't change a thing about it now. Every task made me who I am. Stronger made me more like the woman I was always meant to be. I was Clara Duran's daughter, friend, and daughter-in-law. As I left my office, my story was just beginning as a businesswoman named Survivor. When I joined the last few people at the party, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The music of my life had been playing for so long. Long unhappy and painful, the music had finally found its balance, and I knew it would only get better. From now on, it will be better.